petroleum products, that is petrol, crude oil, high-speed diesel oil, motor spirit, and petrol and natural gas and aviation fuel turbine will continue under excise duty. So that means the excise duty still remains. There is no GST on these products. Now, the biggest problem here is then when you pay excise duty, then what happens is there is no, there is a lot of, हाँ ना नहीं बस निकलने वाला हूँ थोड़ी देर में. हाँ बुक करा दी मैंने, बुक करा दी, कल की सुबह निकलेंगे 9 बजे. हाँ SUV कराई. हाँ मैंने बोल दिया ना, अभी मैं क्लास लेके फिर तुमसे बात करता हूँ. ओके. So petroleum products are still subject to excise duty. So they are outside the ambit of the GST. So the input tax credit is lost here. So anybody who is consuming petrol, diesel, like there are a lot of companies which are buying diesel. Like when I was working in SRF, you used to buy diesel and using that diesel used for generating electricity. Now if we have paid excise duty on the diesel, which is a major part of our raw material source, consumption item, we are not entitled to take a input credit. So it will become part of our cost, ultimately passed on to the consumer. Because you will not get any input credit on all these items which you are consuming, but ultimately the final consumer is going to suffer because he is going to pay a cost of that. Because SRF is not going to get input credit on their final product when they sell to the consumer. Okay? When it reaches the ultimate customer, the diesel will become the cost in the product. So I'll explain that later on. If I follow, it's okay. Otherwise, you can just go to the ChatGPT and understand how it becomes the cost to a manufacturer. Okay? It is passed on to the customer because the chain is broken. Because whatever a company is paying excise duty, he can't take an input credit of that on his final product. So it doesn't become a pass-through. It remains as a source of cost for the company. Okay? And it's one of the major costs for the company. So that's the biggest drawback.
Presently, these are out of GST and maybe brought within purview of GST by the government.
So maybe they'll brought. So there are a lot of thoughts that they should be brought in the purview of GST. Okay, they have been debating and still they are not able to find a solution to that. Okay.
Presently, it is out of GST.
That is the alcohol liquor. Okay.
State excise duty.
So similarly for the liquor also. Liquor also the state government gets a lot of money. So they don't want to lose the right. They say इसके ऊपर भी excise लगाएंगे. Okay. So excise still remain on liquor. Okay.
Tobacco products is be subject to GST 28% and GST compensation.
Here, the tobacco products have been brought under the GST regime, but with a compensation cess. Because they can't keep so many things out of the GST, they said, okay, we'll bring at least this and levy 28% tax, but going to charge cess, so that the person has to pay the same tax which he was paying earlier, but this will be remain for the 5 years and after that it will go away. So 5 years have gone, they have gone in the year 2022, the government has not made a change.
State GST Act. To impose SGST on supply of goods and services within a state, each state has passed its own state GST Act.
See, I'm just carrying on with another 10 minutes. I don't want to give a break so that we'll have an early closure and have a break. Okay, finally. So to improve, so it's just 6:10 maximum or 6:15 maximum. 6:10 to 15, we'll close it. To improve, yeah.
To impose SGST on supply of goods and services within a state, each state has passed its own state GST Act.
So, every state has its own GST Act. Okay? It's the same act. Everybody has copied it and passed the same in their own assembly, state assembly. Okay? So that they can charge tax to the people. As per the Constitution of India, they have to make an act on which they get the right to charge this thing. So that's a complicated part of our Indian system, or everywhere where there's a federal system. So there is one GST. There could have been one GST, like there is one income tax, but here we have GST, or suppose there are 30 states and union territories, there are 30 such laws which are prevailing in each state and union territory. They are dicto same. Okay.
These state GST Acts are copies of CGST Act. All provisions are identical.
Everything is same. Okay. Fine. Now, union territories, read.
commonly referred to as UTGST, is the GST applicable on the goods and services supplied that takes place in any of the 5 union territories of India, including Andaman and Nicobar Islands, Dadra and Nagar Haveli,
Okay.
Chandigarh, Lakshadweep and Daman and Diu. This UTGST will be charged in addition to the central GST explained above for any transaction of goods and services within a union territory. CGST plus UTGST.
So we know that whenever the goods are moving within the union territory, there will be two CGST as well as UTGST. Okay.
Union territory. The reason why a separate GST was implemented for the union territories is that the common state GST cannot be applied in a union territory without legislature. Delhi and Puducherry UTs already have their own legislature, so SGST is applicable to them. UTGST Act has been passed for union territories which don't have legislature.
So they are still made applicable to the states. All the union territories, Delhi and Puducherry, they have their own assemblies, so they have their own law. But everywhere the same GST which is in the central government has been applied dicto to the union territories also.
The goods and service tax registration provisions in India are governed by this GST Act. The registration is mandatory for businesses based on certain turnover limits, nature of activities or other specific criteria.
Okay, do one thing. This is what attendance. Just sign, okay? एक करके sign करते जाओ, and then we will close it, okay? Just we'll talk about the last part, registration, and we'll close on the registration.
So there are 2 sheets. Both the
So,
sheets have to be filled?
Same है?
Yes, sir.
तो एक मुझे वापस कर देना. So by 6:15 I should get this attendance, okay? I'll just put it. So goods and services tax provisions in India are governed by GST Act, okay? So there is a GST Act. Registration is mandatory for business based on certain turnover limits, nature of activities and other specific criteria. So everybody needs to be registered. This says that there is a criteria, okay? Those people who are supplying goods, they should have a registration done. Threshold limit for GST registration. Normal suppliers, so there are suppliers, so service providers or goods suppliers. So you can be either a service provider or a goods supplier. So for service providers, business with annual aggregate turnover exceeding 20 lakhs, they are compulsory, they have to register themselves. So if my turnover is more than 20 lakhs, I'm a professor, I'm providing services, so I should have a GST number. But if I'm in the special category states, the hilly states, then the limit is only 10 lakhs. Suppose I was, in Himachal Pradesh or some state which is called the hilly area. I don't know whether Himachal Pradesh is classified as hilly. So list is given there at the bottom. Okay. Special category states will be Arunachal Pradesh, Manipur, Mizoram, Nagaland, Tripura, where the lower limits apply. So only these hilly areas, the lower limit applies. Suppose I was a professor in Tripura, then I have to get registered if my income goes above 10 lakhs. Suppose I get money in Shivnadar and of other colleges, I get more than 10 lakhs, I have to register if I'm in Tirupura, okay? But if I'm in other state, then 20 lakh limits, okay? If I'm a service provider. If I'm a good supplier, the threshold limit is 40 lakhs, okay? For small states, special states, 20 lakhs. So that means goods, 40 lakhs and 20 lakhs for services. And for some small states, 10 and 20 lakhs is the number. So if you are having a turnover exceeding this limit, you have to go for registration, okay? You have to apply for registration and you should be registered under GST Act. Certain mandatory registration regardless of the turnover. Now so this is very important, okay? Some people have to get them registered irrespective of the turnover. Certain businesses and activities require GST registration irrespective of the turnover. One is, again it is coming here, interstate supply of goods. If you are selling goods from one state to another, then irrespective of turnover, you have to be registered, okay? If you are only in Rajasthan supplying goods from Ajmer to Jaipur and your turnover is below the threshold, no problem. But if you are selling goods out of the state and selling to Delhi, then whatever may be your sale, you have to get your registered. E-commerce operator or aggregators. So if you are an e-commerce like Amazon, Flipkart, they have to get registered irrespective of the turnover. Suppose I am a small startup and I started an e-com business, nothing doing, you have to get registered. Business, there are some cases I've given back. business liable, I have explained this through examples in my coming slide. Business liable to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. There is something called RCM, reverse charge mechanism. The person, like if I am a professor, I am supplying services to Shivnadar University. I have to pay tax. Okay? But sometime, because suppose I am not registered, then Shivnadar is going to pay tax on my behalf and recover the tax from me. So here, the supplier is not paying, the recipient is paying. The person who is supposed to pay, he is either too small or under some condition, the recipient has to pay tax. It's called the reverse charge mechanism. I'm going to explain that in detail later on. It's a very important thing. Non-resident tax payable persons. So all NRIs, they have to get registered. If you are an NRI and doing business in India, you have to get yourself registered, irrespective of turnover. Casual taxable persons, that means event-based suppliers. If your government put an exhibition and you are selling as a casual person, you have to get yourself registered. Agents supplying goods on behalf of others, so they have to get it. Businesses involved in taxable supplies via e-commerce operator. So anybody who is supplying goods via e-commerce, he has to also get registered, irrespective of your turnover. You can't say I have a turnover of only 5 lakhs, I am too small, but you have to get registered because you are supplying through Amazon. Then of course we have some TDS and TCS, we are going to talk about that later. Voluntary registration. Businesses can voluntarily register under CGST even if they are below a threshold limit. So why people will go for registration if they are not falling under the category? If their turnover is below 40 lakhs or 20 lakhs or whatever amount we have discussed, their ability to issue invoices. So they are able to issue invoices, a taxable invoice, and they become eligible to take income tax, ITC, because if you are not a registered person, then you can't claim ITC, you can't claim input tax credit. But if you want to do that, you have to get registered. So some people say that tomorrow I may become big. If I'm losing input tax credit, becoming my cost, I'm not able to pass on to the, my cost of goods are going up and I'm making less profit. So in that case, if he gets himself registered, he will be eligible for input tax credit. And this all you will learn and understand when we go and do some problems, okay? Examples. So at the moment, just park yourself. Some companies, even if they are not liable to be registered, they get themselves registered because they get the two powers. One, to raise an invoice, a GST invoice. Second, they are eligible to become an input tax credit. Suppose like Maruti, for example. Suppose Maruti was a very small company. Suppose that it's a small company. It's not Maruti, it's a very small company. Whatever tires they are buying, whatever things they are buying, whatever GST they are paying on the inputs, they are not able to take the credit of that. Okay, so they are going to charge tax on the customers. Okay, on the GST on the final product, and they are not able to take the input tax credit. So their car will become very costly when they sell to the consumers, because the 70,000 rupees the input tax credit they are paid, they get input credit on, because the car the duties GST is say 1 lakh rupees, so they ultimately pay only 30,000 because they are adding only 30,000 value to that product. On 70,000 rupees of GST they are paid, they get a credit. So ultimately the customer pays 1 lakh. Now the customer will be paying 1,70,000 tax. So that's why the small manufacturers or small traders, they go for registration, because then only they'll become eligible for input tax credit. Have you got it? This is very important. Then the compensation cess, the last item onto this thing. Now, if you are a very small guy and you want to be totally out of this GST ambit, you don't want to be part of the GST and can't comply because you think the law is very complex. So available to small businesses with turnover up to 1.5 crores or 75 lakhs for small category states, special category states, which we have discussed, like Tripura and other. So if your turnover is 1.5 crores, that means you are selling roughly around 10 to 12 lakhs of your turnover per month, then pay tax at the reduced rate. Pay just 1% tax or 5% for restaurants. Okay? If you are running a restaurant, you pay just 5% and forget. That's all. Okay? Cannot collect GST from the customers or claim ITC. You can't claim ITC, but you just pay 5% and that's the end of it. On some goods and services, there is only 1%. You pay just 1% tax, that's all. Just file one return and then it's the end of the day, or pay 5% if you're a restaurant owner. So many restaurants, they're paying you, when you go and eat outside, you pay only 5% tax. Okay? On restaurant, the bill is 5%. Okay? Fine. So if they raise the invoice of 2.5 and 255, that means they are registered. If you are not registered, your turnover is only 1.5 crores, you just pay 5% and forget. That's all. End of it. Okay? Is that okay? But when you eat outside in a restaurant, they'll charge 5%, 2.5% CGST, 2.5% SGST. That means they are registered. Okay? Fine. In that case, they are. But they don't get the input tax credit. You know, just to finish off this, when the GST came in India, the restaurants, they were charging 18%. Because when you eat outside, you are paying 18% tax. But you are eligible for input tax credit. Suppose you are buying something and paying GST on that, you are eligible to take input tax credit. But then the media and the opposition, they blew the whole thing up. They say that eating outside has become very costly now because it become 18%. Earlier the service tax was only 12%, now it has come to 18%. So eating out has become very, very difficult now. It has become very expensive. So government realized that something has to be done. So immediately on the next day they announced the tax is going to be only 5% on restaurants. But the restaurant owners now will not be eligible for taking input tax credit. So that was a major drawback for the restaurants because their cost will go up now, but the customer will be charged only 5%. So in fact, we were paying the same amount, but optically it looked that we are paying only 5%. Okay? Because a lot of inputs which goes, they are allowed to take an input tax credit, that thing has been snatched from them. So everybody came, because nobody knows the law so easily, so they saw the tax has become 5%. So that was the thing. Okay? So we close here, okay?